Happy Sunday, everyone. I am having a lemon lactose free yogurt popsicle. Okay, so what are we talking about today? We are talking about growing your career by being authentic. Look, a lot of career coaches talk about how to make yourself look desirable, sound desirable, so that you can get into rooms and get the buy-in. And that's how they teach you to grow your career, by being overly polished. But what if you get into those rooms and you're constantly putting your mask on? That popsicle is amazing, by the way. So let's talk about that. I know a lot of you try to focus on that executive presence. Maybe you've been given that feedback. Oh, you don't have executive presence. What does that even mean? What does executive presence even mean? Because if executive presence means that you have to speak in a certain way just to be able to get along with a senior leadership team, and you have to constantly pretend that you're someone else, you have to pretend that you share the same values, then in the long run, you are not going to be happy. Because isn't it a lot easier to actually find organizations that align with your values already so that you don't have to fake your way in, fake your way to survive, fake your way to move up? That's what I want to talk about today. Because putting on that mask might get you in, but it's actually quite costly in the long run. I've experienced that myself in the last 15 years or rather in the 15 years that I've been in the corporate world. It's been like 26 years now in my career. So the first part of my career, which is the 15 years, was in corporate. And then the last 6 years has been coaching executives through my business. And so in the first 15 years of my career, yes, I want to tell you about how costly it was for me to actually put on that mask in the name of let us, act a certain way and be overly polished. And I've actually seen this in the 6 years of working with more than 1,000 senior leaders, seeing them burn out because they pretended to be someone else in order to get that job out of necessity and then burn it all down. And that's not what we want. Here's the thing. Growing your career actually has nothing to do with executive presence. Oh my goodness. Yes, I teach that in my program, but I will tell you that that is not the reason people grow their careers. If you are stuck at the level you're at, whether you're a senior individual contributor trying to move to director level or a director wanting to move to VP level, VP wanting to move to C level, I can guarantee you that the reason you're not moving up isn't your lack of executive presence, isn't because you're not polished enough. It's because you've spent years trying to make an environment that doesn't align with who you are work. And the longer you've stayed, the longer it has become difficult for you to leave. And the more it has chipped away your confidence. One of my clients shared with me when we first started working together that they lost the ability to speak out and contribute after a decade at the same organization. That is not burnout. That is identity erosion. And the longer you perform in these environments, the harder it becomes for you to remember who you were before you did that. Okay? So drop a number between 1 to 10 in the chat. How aligned do you feel with your organization right now? You don't have to say that you're not happy so that, we're protecting your privacy. Just tell me between 1 to 10. Just drop a number, 1 to 10, to help me understand how aligned you feel with your organization right now. I'm very curious. Now, I want to talk about some research that I have personally conducted to understand the cost of people who stay in organizations that don't align with who they are. Here's what most career coaches don't tell you, because it would undermine the polish yourself business, because they sell the business of, let us make you sound like a leader. Let us work on your executive presence. Here's what they don't tell you. There is actually a body of research on what is called surface acting. This is when you perform emotions you don't actually feel. This is when you fake it. There is a 2011 meta-analysis that looked at 95 studies covering nearly 500 measurements. And here are the findings. Surface acting, which means that you kind of like fake it till you make it, is significantly correlated with impaired well-being. Effect sizes between 0.39 and 0.48, that's a strong relationship in psychological research. It correlated with worse job attitudes, which means lower satisfaction, lower commitment. When you are pretending that you actually care, when you fake your values to impress a senior leadership team, when you are putting on the mask and overly focusing on how many, ums you say and how polished you sound, when in reality, you actually don't enjoy the work, you don't care about the organization's mission, they are doing layoffs left and center. Maybe there has been a recent merger and acquisition and leadership has changed, but you're faking it. You're pretending that you actually care, that you're happy, and you're overcompensating by worrying about how you sound in order you fit in the room. Guess what? That results in lower satisfaction, lower commitment. And it's actually correlated with worse performance, not better. So I want you to think about that right now. My biggest emotional challenge right now is imposter syndrome. You know what? That's a very, very great comment. And thank you for sharing that, Christopher. The thing about imposter syndrome is it's not always a signal that you are not competent. Imposter syndrome can happen actually when you are a high performer who doesn't get along or doesn't like the people around you. And so you feel like an imposter compared to them because your mannerisms and your values are different. So I just want you to think about that for a second. When you don't relate to the people around you, yes, you feel like an imposter because you don't belong, because you fake belonging. Have you ever been around a circle of friends where you kind of find yourself like an outsider? They all get along, and you actually know that they're just pretending to be your friend because they need something from you or they want something from you. The workplace is not that different. It really isn't that different. And so I want you to think about this, Christopher. Perhaps the reason you feel that way is because you don't get along or relate to the people that you work with. And it's not always because you are an underperformer. Okay? Now, here's the kicker. If you are a high performer, but you find that you don't get along with the people around you or you don't relate to them at work, it can actually turn you into a worse performer. So I want you to think about that. So now let's look into what that actually means. The advice to fake it till you make it, to perform executive presence, to manage your image instead of being authentic and being yourself, the research says that it doesn't even work. It hurts your performance, it erodes your well being, and it leaves you exhausted. This is why senior leaders who've been performing for a decade feel stuck. When you pretend that you actually like the senior executives that you report into, it drains you in the long run. So let's talk about what actually predicts whether you are going to be successful and grow in your career. I want to look at the other side. What does the research say actually predicts whether someone stays, grows, and advances in their organization? What does it have to say about that? The most rigorous study on this was published in 2005. It pulled together 172 studies on what they call person organization fit. Basically, how aligned you are with the values and culture of the place that you work. And here are some of the findings. There's a positive correlation between fit and tenure. People who obviously feel that their values align with the organization values, that the direction that the organization's going, you actually believe in. How many of you are in organizations where senior leadership is making these ridiculous decisions on the direction of the company, whether it's entering a certain market, whether in the way that they're hiring people? If you don't believe in that and you don't align, like we talked about before, that can actually be costly to you. But if you actually share those values and believe in them, then you end up staying in the long run. There's also a strong positive correlation with job satisfaction and commitment, and there is a strong negative correlation with wanting to quit. And here's another thing. When there is better fit, that actually predicts your performance. So if you actually feel that your values align with the company that you're in, then what happens is that you actually feel more motivated to perform and you get promoted faster. So what is the research saying? It's not the polish, it's the fit that helps you grow in your career. When you are in the right room, you don't have to perform to belong. You belong because you fit, and from that foundation, you grow. That's why I focus on alignment with my clients, because when you're surrounded by people who are aligned, that's when the real exponential growth comes in. Here's the thing, friends. In doing this for so many years, 6 years to be accurate, actually, it's been more than that anyway. Um, Working with over 1,000 professionals, even when it comes to interviews, when people tell me I've applied to so many jobs, I'm not able to attract opportunities, I'm not able to convert my interviews into offers. And I see this often where people try to manipulate their resume to be able to get more opportunities. They try to bend themselves to what the market is asking for to get opportunities. They worry about trends, they worry about what jobs are in demand. And when you try to play with those tactics, you might get more interviews. You might convert those interviews into offers, but you want to think about your career growth long term. Just because you got into a company, that doesn't mean that you're going to stay in the long run. And it also doesn't mean that you're going to be able to move up. Now, arguably, I'm going to say to you as well, again, people who come to me, they've been burnt by other career coaching programs who promise them you'll get a job in 90 days. As long as you have our magical template, you are going to get the job. And even with that, they actually don't get more opportunities. They get less opportunities because companies can sniff when you are pretending. Okay? So that's what I wanted to say. Now, let me tell you a story. And let me just check the questions here. If you have any questions, by the way, for me, I'd love it if you drop it in the chat. If you have questions around um, anything I've said around fit versus performing, if you want to share your perspective with me around executive presence, feel free to share that in the chat, or if there's anything you want to ask me. It's always great for me to actually see your questions because then I can answer them versus, just me talking to myself. Okay. Having said that, I want to tell you a story. So, one of my clients who came to me, I noticed something phenomenal. So, usually I only work with clients who have 15 years of experience, but this client only had 5. And normally, when someone with 5 years of experience comes to me, I turn them away because I only work with people generally who have more than 10 years of experience. But there was something very unique about this individual. I'll tell you guys that even though she only has 5 years of experience, she's been operating at the level of someone who has 10 years of experience. Now, it's not because she has executive presence. It's not because she has the most polished, appearance and communication skills. It's because she found a mentor inside her organization who actually took her under her wing, believed in her, advocated for her. And that significantly accelerated her career. I want you to think of someone who mentored you in your career. Think about how happy you were when that was going on. Let me know in the chat if you can relate to that. Now, when that mentor retired, my client felt it. She was no longer feeling like she was in an environment that felt aligned. And that's why she came to me. She wanted to leave. Now, this is where I want to bring in another piece of research because there's a really important distinction here. Have an open line to talk with you. Lives don't work that way. So just put your question in the chat and I will answer it. Now, this is where I want to bring in another piece of research because there is a really important distinction here. The economist Sylvia Hann Hewlett has done extensive research on what she calls sponsorship versus mentorship. And her data shows that male managers with sponsors are 23% more likely to be promoted. For women, 19%. For Black managers, 65% more likely to advance. So sponsors matter a lot. And especially if you are a minority. Why did I say Black managers 65%? Because I wanted to also emphasize that if you are a visible minority, if you are someone who feels like you're in a disadvantage, whether you are facing ageism, whether you are a female or you are a visible minority, that is where it's even more important for you to find an environment that aligns with your values and where you actually have sponsors, allies. Now, this is critical. There is research that also shows that women often pick the wrong sponsors. They pick people they're comfortable with, people they want to befriend, not people whose values actually align with theirs and who can credibly advocate for them. And here's where it connects to the mask. A lot of career advice tells you to befriend powerful people, get close to them, position yourself as useful, be in proximity to power. And this is where there is that pressure to have that executive presence, to communicate a certain way, to look polished, so that when you're networking, you get into those rooms. But here's a breaking news. When you put yourself in that situation, one of the two things happen. Either the person uses you to look good and shine. So I want you to think of a boss that you pretended to be someone else in order to be in proximity to them, and who sucked all the information out of you and took the credit, right? How does that help you in your career if that boss did that? That's just a transactional relationship. And so that's the thing that I'm trying to say, is that when you are approaching your career in a transactional way, part of it being transactional is you pretending you are someone else and you focusing on the tactical things, like, let me communicate a certain way, let me have all of those big words in my communication, let me showcase that executive presence. You're actually not looking for those meaningful relationships. You are using surface level ways to build surface level relationships. And this is why you're not finding the right people who advocate for you in organizations. You need to find organizations with a great culture, because even if the work is great, even if the company has a big name, you're not going to succeed without that alignment and without having those allies. So the research is clear. The sponsors and mentors who actually move your career are the ones who share your values, who believe in you because they see who you actually are, not because you've performed your way into their attention. Now, I really want to spend a lot of time on executive presence because, listen, I'm not saying you should not have executive presence. And by the way, my definition of executive presence is quite different than most coaches. To me, I believe that charisma is executive presence, and everyone has innate charisma. Charisma doesn't come from learning to be overly polished and learning to be someone else or using impressive language. Charisma is actually feeling comfortable with who you are as a person and really not being afraid to be vocal about your point of view. Okay, so let's define what executive presence is. What reads as executive presence to one person doesn't read that way to another. It's culturally constructed, which means it's also culturally exclusionary. The senior leaders that I work with, people who've worked across multiple industries, immigrants who've built careers across countries, women who've supported 4 directors, 3 VPs without being seen as director material themselves. These are people most likely to be told they need to develop executive presence. And what that often translates to is be more like the dominant culture in this room, speak less like yourself, move less like yourself, sound less like yourself. It's faking it. And it's dressed up as professional development. And the surface acting research tells us exactly what happens when you do this for years. Your well being erodes, your performance erodes, your sense of yourself erodes. And this is why, when people have been in these types of organizations for more than 10 years and get laid off, they have to go through a very lengthy recovery period in order to rediscover themselves and in order to repair that damage. I know this because a lot of these folks are my clients. I have been there myself. And you don't want to go through that, right? So, charisma doesn't come from saying fewer ums or mastering executive presence. Charisma comes from being yourself in a room that's actually built for who you are. It is so much easier to to find, a culture that aligns with your way of thinking and behaving than actually trying to adapt to a place that just doesn't align with your vibe, right? Okay. So here's what I focus on with clients. We go into your entire career history. We look through your entire career story. We literally look at all of the roles that you've held, all of the initiatives that you've led. And I don't just ask you what you did. I actually ask you questions like, what were the people like that you worked with? What was your boss like? How was your boss behaving? How are you responding? How are you behaving? Because I come at it from a psychology angle, not like let's prove yourself angle. That's the wrong way of thinking, because when you're constantly trying to prove yourself and sell yourself, what happens is you're constantly caring more about what these organizations want from you versus you deciding what organization would actually fit you and bring you joy. You are a leader. You should not position yourself as a follower. And as a leader, you should drive what you want in your career and understand it. And instead of branding yourself in a way where you're trying to fit yourself into boxes, you should brand yourself in a way where you're paying attention to behaviors of leaders that you worked with, that you've enjoyed, and talking about that in your branding so that you attract the right rooms where you can sound like yourself and attract sponsors and advocates who are invested in you without needing something back. And we need to understand, what did you keep doing regardless of title? What type of problems that you enjoy solving that got you to where you are? Okay? And we may need to make changes because you might have exhibited specific behaviors that got you into trouble and made you settle. And we need to trace back what those behaviors look like so that you don't end up in the self-fulfilling prophecy of toxic cultures and wrong organizations. And so that's my approach. It's quite holistic and it's centered around who you are as a professional versus you constantly feeling that you need to prove yourself. Okay, so I want to know what questions you have right now, having heard this. Has anyone here ever realized that they were performing to belong somewhere? And what was the trigger? I'd love to know, what's the moment you knew that this was not the right organization for you? Take a minute and think about it, because that is going to help you with your next move and your next career growth. If you are right now at an organization and you've been constantly having this conversation with your leadership team about wanting to get promoted, but you're not getting promoted, maybe instead of beating yourself up and thinking that there's a performance gap and maybe a certification that you need to take, I want you to go back to some of the projects that you were proud of leading and ask yourself, what are some behaviors that you've seen from your team, from your senior leadership team, that didn't align with your values? And maybe when you start writing that down, you are going to notice that you're just not in a relationship that's aligned. It's kind of like being in a romantic relationship with someone, right? They may be great on paper, but there are certain behaviors and actions that they've taken that now that you look back, you realize, oh gosh, I disagree with all of this. No wonder we did not, get married or did not stay in this relationship. But I was blaming myself and thinking that maybe I did something wrong. And you didn't, right? So think about that. And if this really resonated, then it's definitely worth a conversation to book a call with me so that we can figure out how you can get out of this situation where you feel stagnant and what do you need to do in order to grow your career. How can you find those organizations that are aligned with who you are so that you can actually move up faster? I have a client right now who is at an organization that she loves, and she's been there for more than 4 years, and she's quite happy. She moved up multiple levels because she finally found a senior leadership team that advocates for her and aligns with her values. I have several clients in that situation after working with me because when you build the right foundation in your career versus rush into applying for jobs, that's what creates longevity, and that's what keeps you bouncing around from one job to another, which frankly is quite exhausting. So if you are an ambitious person, you are not the kind of person who will constantly blame the market and not do anything about it. If you are someone who is serious about growing your career, then feel free to book a career diagnosis with me. So, what happens in the career diagnosis? Let me first of all share with you how to book it, and then we can talk about what happens when you book that career diagnosis. It really is a great opportunity that I'm creating for people to get clear on what's blocking them and their goals. Honestly, when was the time you had an honest conversation with someone who is neutral about your career, right? Probably a while, especially if you've been in the same organization for a long time. So if you go into my profile and click on book an appointment, this is going to take you to my career diagnosis page. And the career diagnosis is a 15-minute call. So if you click on this button, it's going to take you to a 2-minute intake. Doesn't take long to complete. It gives me some context in terms of what your goals are and what's blocking you so that we can create that plan. So let's talk about what happens in the career diagnosis. So in the career diagnosis, I ask you questions. One of them is understanding your goal. A lot of times people hear me saying, I want to understand your goal. If you and I were sitting in a coffee shop and 1 year has passed and you feel very happy in your career, what needs to happen in order for you to feel happy? People really struggle with this question because they're so over fixated on what's possible and what isn't. And they're also feeling maybe a sense of sort of giving up because they may be in a situation where they're not happy and it's hard for them to actually be a visionary and imagine a better career. So, what this exercise does is it gets you out of your head, okay? And it pushes you into painting a better, let's say, future state for yourself, which is extremely important. This is where people kind of get into the whole woo woo of manifestation. I don't believe that manifestation is magic, but I do believe that if you're not able to set a goal for yourself where you can actually visualize a better future for yourself, then you are going to feel stuck in your situation. Think about the best athletes. They'll always tell you things like, I put a photo of me on my fridge where I actually won the medal. I photoshopped, my face and I put it on this guy who won a medal. Or I picture myself, on the stage with the medal, right? So we want to do that. We want to get you into this mode where you're very specific about your goals and what you want. I'll tell you guys a story of one of my clients, Rashid, who landed at Amazon. He was so specific, and said, I want to land a role at a company like Amazon or Meta because I want to learn from the giants. So that's how specific he is. He didn't worry about if it's possible, how to go about it. He came up with a specific goal. In fact, if you guys know Jimmy Fallon, do you guys know Jimmy Fallon? A lot of you might know him, the late night show. He was very specific and said, I want to be on that show. I want to be on Saturday Night Live. That was his specific goal. Instead of worrying about whether it was possible or not, he set that goal for himself. So in the career diagnosis, we talk about a goal that you set for yourself. We talk about what is a salary that you want to make. What type of organization you want. What are some of your values? And then once we set that goal, then we brainstorm all of the things that are getting in your way, slowing you down. Because once we understand your goal and what's getting in your way and slowing you down, then we can reverse engineer that and come up with a plan that's going to help you overcome these hurdles so that you can achieve that goal, whether it's a $200,000 salary at an amazing organization with a great boss, whether it is a $300,000 salary, whether it's a $150,000 salary, right? We need to be clear on that goal. And then we look into what's blocking you so that we can create a plan that gets you there. Okay, so I am simply a Zoom call away. Feel free to go on my LinkedIn profile and click on the book an appointment button. And I look forward to talking to you. If you are someone who is a high achiever, who is going after a leadership role, whether it's a senior individual contributor role, director role, VP role, and if your values obviously align with mine, which we'll find out when we have that conversation. And then at the end of the 15-minute call, if there is an opportunity there to work together, then we can make that determination. If not, that's okay too. You come out of the call with a great plan. All right. I hope you enjoy your Sunday. And if you found this useful, I would really appreciate it that you give it a like, repost it for someone who might need it, because that helps with the algorithm in terms of putting it in front of the right people. B, it gives me feedback that what I've shared is useful. And if you want to go the extra mile, a comment would be nice in terms of sharing with me what is your biggest takeaway from this that you've realized so that I can create more useful content for you. Okay, I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend, and thank you for tuning in.